So guys, I'm just sitting here listening to this loop of this song outside that's like doo 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 doom doo 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 doom doo 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 doom, and it's been going for like an hour, and it's gonna go for the rest of the day. So anyway, I recently was asked the question of whether I think that graffiti is art or vandalism, and I decided that now that I have a super hipster haircut, I am going to answer the question because there's no one more qualified to answer the question of whether graffiti is art or vandalism than a hipster kid. So, and I'm wearing my full bleed shirt, which is like as hipster as you can get on a t-shirt, and I have a non-matching scarf that, wait, I'll put it on in a hipster way. But it's hot, so we'll see how long I can make this last. And I'll answer the question now. Anyway, on my Tumblr, I'll often propose my theories on a lot of different aspects of art theory. And I'll wait for this truck to drive by. I don't like to edit these second channel videos, so I apologize for them being very, very unprofessional. Anyway, so if you guys are interested in art theory or in seeing what my opinion is as a microblogging art critic, you should definitely go over there and check it out. It's really hot, so I don't think I'm going to wear this actually at all anymore. But anyway, I'm just going to read what I had to write and then offer a little bit more of an expansion upon that based on what people's responses were and what my responses were to them. So here we go. So the question was asked by this girl named TDL Awesome, and she said, "Graffiti, art of vandalism. I know this is a question. This question is boring and will never be resolved, kind of, but it's totally fine if you do not feel like answering. This is for my documentary, and if you have an answer, may I cite you as a source?" This is my response. You most certainly can cite me as a source, and I will try to answer this relatively thoroughly, as I have a pretty passionate stance on this common question and want to express it as well as I can. These are my opinions. Graffiti without much room for debate is both art and vandalism. Street art without any room for debate is art. Graffiti is necessarily street art, but street art does not necessarily have to be graffiti. There are many instances of legal street art. The most confusing aspect of this debate, and the part that gets misconstrued the most often and amongst the widest population of people debating this question, is the notion of graffiti style. There are many things done in a graffiti style that are not graph, but that imply graph, almost implying all graph is one particular overarching genre of wild style pieces, because of the way they look. I will attempt to explain this as well, though it has no bearing on the value of graffiti itself as art or vandalism. People say that there's graffiti that is art and graffiti that is vandalism, claiming things like the purpose of the tag being nothing but defacing property as a deferent of the title as art. But even then, what are they tagging with at such a moment? I'd argue that inevitably they are tagging with art. That is to say that even when a tag is meant for nothing more than to stake a claim on an area, much like the 3 dots in a triangle format prevalent in my neighborhood, representing the territory of the southern Mexicans, the tagger in question, whether he considers himself an artist or not, is tagging with art. It is invariably vandalism if he is tagging a structure that is not his own, but I would argue in addition that it is invariably art. Of note as well is the fact that in my beloved city of Los Angeles, the history of graffiti is one of gang activity from writers who often do not consider themselves artists. When I speak to older graph writers, many of them tell me that LA, and especially jail in LA, is a horrible place for graffiti writers and street artists. Gangs often don't like when a street artist steps out on his own and creates a beautiful work of art on one of their walls in their territory, and if this street artist is caught, he will find out just how much they don't like it. If you go to jail for graffiti in LA, it would be advisable to come up with a story a little more hard-boiled than getting caught throwing up a wheat paste of Obama as insert ironic figure of pop culture here. Gangs often throw up their tags strictly for the purpose of vandalism, and often amongst other reasons, with no purpose of art whatsoever. But that doesn't take away from the fact that their tags are still art. I have a relatively unique stance on what can be qualified as art, one that could essentially include every object in existence that has ever existed and that will ever exist into the category of art, but I feel it is pretty justified. Feel free to observe it here, and I link to it in the article, but I'll link to it with an annotation here because I've also made a video of that. It essentially states that anything created and accepted by one or more persons as art is, in fact, art. Because of this definition, I may not be the best critic to ask about the nature of vandalism-driven graffiti and its placement in the art canon, but I can say that the notion of graffiti has been highly misconstrued as street art has become more popular. Graffiti is inscriptions or additions or subtractions to or from the environment that were made illegally or on someone else's property. When you witness a mural on the side of an auto shop by the entirety of the MSK crew, wild-style burners spread as far as the eye can see, you're probably not looking at graffiti. You're probably looking at street art done in a graffiti style through a commissioned or at least sanctioned mural. Murals and graffiti are not the same thing, though a mural can be done in a graffiti style. I think the current definition of street art as this vague genre that includes stencils and wheat paste and urban, site-specific, clever installations is a faulty one. I think street art should be defined as just that, art on the street. Street, on the other hand, should be defined as anywhere in the public in this particular case. So the word street in street art doesn't actually mean street, it means like visible in the public, someplace that's visible in the public. As this notion of street art has emerged thanks to revolutionary intellectuals and thinkers like Shepard Fairey, Ron English, and the ever-prominent Banksy, more people have become aware of the graffiti world. Shep and Banksy are very important figures in the graffiti world and have influenced hundreds of thousands of people with their vandalism, their street art, and conclusively, their graffiti. They have also influenced even more people and established their relevance in the infinitely more important world of art history with their street art and legal work that has been seen in galleries or fashion blogs. Shepard Fairey has a very successful and important clothing line, none of which is done in a graffiti style, but all of which looks just like his style. He is indeed a graffiti artist because he has done plenty of graffiti, but his immensely popular clothing line is not done in a graffiti style. I'd go so far as to argue that his shirts themselves are also street art because they are often seen in public from the street by passers-by of their wearers, but I will save that argument for another day. Graffiti style has become this descriptor that brings to mind subway trains, custom airbrushed shirts, and downtown alley throwies and tags. It looks like a Reebok or a Futura piece, and it implies a history of very revolutionary writers. Writers like to say that graffiti is the biggest art movement of all time because it is partaken in by the most people and has been that way for the longest amount of time, but I would argue that claiming graffiti, it as illegally inscribing on someone else's property, is the largest art movement, is like claiming that oil painting is an art movement. I think that graffiti is not a movement, but instead a method. I have strayed a bit from the original question, but I will say that graffiti is both art and vandalism, and to claim that it can't be both is simply an ignorant opinion pressed upon us by people in power who think that once something is art, it is to be sanctioned into a realm of holy value and transcendent importance. The real question, and the one much harder to answer, is whether something that has been created illegally, like a graffiti piece, tag, or throw-up, should be preserved, and at what time, under what circumstances, that notion is to be established. The Banksy pieces that have all been going up lately that have been preserved, they're just as illegal as if my roommate Caleb were to go out and tag 50 dumpsters in a night. However, we decide that the Banksy piece is worth saving and Caleb's tags aren't because I don't know why I'm bringing up Caleb, but he's not as well known as Banksy, so his tags aren't worth saving. And that's the question that I think people should be asking now that we've advanced as a culture and advanced as mankind and witnessed the power that art has to change, influence, and increase the value of modern culture. Graffiti is art and graffiti is vandalism, and it's interesting to me that there is a perceived contradiction here because one value does not revoke the other. What gets people thinking that graffiti cannot be both is that people see art as something to be saved and vandalism as essentially the rejection of that notion. But graffiti will always live in temporality, such as the method of graffiti defines. It's only once the concept of art preservation enters the frame that we as humans introduce any aspect of conflict. And that's the concept that people should be debating. Love, Jacob. When I wrote this, I got a lot of responses from people who were saying that graffiti is vandalism, which makes it not art. I don't think that that's a justified opinion. I don't feel like you can even argue that point. Vandalism, just because something is vandalism doesn't mean it's not art. If someone were to break a window that's made of a bunch of different colors, like a stained glass window or something, if Jeff Koons were to go break a window and then make it an art piece and arrange it in some fancy way and put it up in LACMA or some awesome contemporary museum, it's not art because it was born of vandalism. It's still art because people are accepting it as art, so that pretty much makes it art. I don't see why there's any difference between that act of vandalism and another act of vandalism. I wish I knew an art piece that was made of vandalism that everyone loves, but I can't think of any right now. And tagging something on a wall or painting a mural on a wall that isn't legal, I don't understand why it's not art at that point. Like, people consider that no longer art because it's now vandalism. I understand that people conceive of art as this thing that's to be saved and preserved, and people conceive of graffiti as this thing that's not. However, preservation doesn't make something art. Just because it's art doesn't mean you have to save it. And just because something's vandalism doesn't mean that it's nothing but vandalism. So there's a distinction there that I don't think people like to recognize, and I think a lot of that is because people think of art as this thing that needs to be preserved, and they don't want to think of graffiti as something that needs to be preserved. But graffiti is not something that needs to be preserved. Graffiti is a method that is born of the desire to create something that you know will not be preserved. So yeah, there's no reason to draw a line between art and vandalism, and we don't have to do that. I do think graffiti's wrong. I think that it's an evil act to partake in and something that you should be punished for. And if you're tagging someone else's property, then you should suffer the consequences, whatever those consequences are. Because if I have my laptop here and you decide that you want to go write all over it, I'd be really pissed off, and I would force you to suffer some consequences. I do, however, think that there are certain things like streets and mailboxes and things like that that the taxpayers pay for, and they have the right to an opinion over whether that thing should be covered in art or not. So I don't really have as much of a problem with a graffiti artist who pays his taxes going out and tagging a mailbox in front of my house. If he tagged my house, I would be upset, but if he tagged the mailbox in front, that's partially his mailbox, so he has the right to decide whether that thing should be painted or not. And I also have the right to decide if I want that thing painted over, or if I want to call the cops on him and have him punished for that. So yeah, that's my opinion, and I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to stop talking right now. And I hope you liked it.